Over the past 3 years, there were 173 escapes by inmates across the country, although Correctional Services says this number is decreasing. But one escape is one too many, as these are dangerous, convicted criminals on our streets. And they haven't been recaptured. Good evening. Welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Mpofu-Walsh. While the true facts will hopefully emerge in the courts about how multiple security breaches were committed at Mangaung's Correctional Center, this matter raises serious questions about prison security and the complicity of officials who enable such escapes through commission and omission. Tonight we ask, to what extent are these high-profile escapes reflective of the dismal state of security in South Africa's prisons? To further this conversation, let's welcome Singabakho Nxumalo from the Correctional Services Department as spokesperson, and Richard Mamabulo representing the Police and Prisons Labour Union POP crew. Remember to engage in tonight's topic on Twitter using @Unfiltered SABC. Let's watch this clip to give us some context on our discussion tonight.
Dubbed as one of the most daring escapes that revealed the heights of lawlessness in a country with one of the world's highest crime levels, the Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandi Phamagudumana story exposed the ugly truth about South Africa's prison corruption and the weaknesses in security systems that enable rogue behavior and prison escapes.
In that facility we have different sections. We chose to then accommodate him at CMAX because we're also looking at the intensity of the security and the contact that we need to manage around him, given the type of offender he is.
The so-called Facebook rapist Thabo Bester, detained for life at the public-private partnership prison of Mangaung, pulled a fast one on the country as he, together with his partner in crime, carefully planned his escape, allegedly paying staff using his illegally acquired millions, and while in prison and apparently moving in and out of prison at will.
The accused also requested that he's today, because we asked she has to trust to represent him.
To fake his death, the scheme required the complicity of corrupt officials, to violate the prison's access control rules, to pretend that his life was in danger so he could be moved to a cell that's close to the emergency exit, to bring in accelerants to start the fire, to deliver a corpse to be burnt in a cell, to switch off the security cameras, and to open doors for him to leave prison.
South African public, citizens who live in this country are entitled, because your job is to make sure they're safe living in this country. That's your job. And you allow a serial rapist and murderer to run around doing as he pleases while you know that that's the case, and you don't inform the citizens of this country. It's an absolute disgrace.
As Parliament quickly convened a hearing last week, holding both the Correctional Services Department and its private partner in Mangaung, G4S Security, as well as the Justice and Police Ministers to account, the country's collective jaws remained raised as revelation after revelation confirmed the apparent ineptitude even in how they handled the matter after it became clear that Bester was alive, further placing his victims and the general public at risk. If security systems in the country's well-resourced prisons can be easily tampered with, what does it say about security in South Africa's prisons, and the extent to which prison officials are complicit in the escapes that have happened so far? I am Andrew Mokhatle for Unfiltered, SABC News.
Thank you very much for joining me. Mr. Nxumalo, let's begin with you as someone intimately linked with the department. The inspecting judge of our correctional system, Edwin Cameron, recently said that he believes that collusion surrounding the Thabo Bester escape goes right to the top. Why has nobody been held accountable yet in your department for that collusion?
When you look at the Thabo Bester's case, how he escaped, it's something that is different from every other matter that we ever dealt with in the past.
Doesn't that make it worse, Mr. Nxumalo, that if it's different,
in a
it's
sense
on a
that
higher level and should have been taken even more seriously?
Yes, in a sense that you've got a contractor who gives you a report to say an inmate by this name has committed suicide. And you've got no reasons to doubt that, except then to say, when an inmate has passed on under such circumstances, it therefore says you need to start with your investigation.
Can I ask you on that?
Yes.
Because the department did release a statement to say what you're saying, that they
Thabo
thought
Bester has committed
that
suicide.
he had committed suicide.
Yes.
Shouldn't there have been more verification of that fact before you went ahead and released that statement?
Okay, what happened is that a report will forward to head office to say there is an incident, and operating procedure says within 15 minutes an incident must be reported, that an inmate at cell 35 has set himself alight, and the body has been even collected by the police. And then for us is to say, because this is an unnatural death, it has to be investigated. Then that's when our officials will then start now to say, let us investigate the circumstances leading to this person committing suicide. Was it something that could be avoidable, or if perhaps there was foul play in it? And that's what we started with. But when we started working on it, already there were difficulties in terms of how the whole thing happened. The people who were there, even getting information, as we're trying to source such details, people were being removed, others dismissed, others placed on suspension. It then complicated the whole thing to a point where we needed to even reach out to the SAPS to say, you ought to assist us here, beside the case of investigating someone who's committed suicide.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And there was a lot of uncertainty. Even the inspecting judge, the minister have spoken about how stupendous the story was, and to believe it, you had to.
That something like that actually
impossible.
Even happened, yes.
But at the same time, you were prepared to say that he had committed suicide without the proper verification. So, on the one hand, you can't say, well, it was a very complicated situation, but on the other hand, we were prepared to issue the statement, which came down very clearly on one side.
Okay.
Couldn't you have said, look, we don't know what's happened, there's clearly been an incident, but to say he had committed suicide, you misled the nation in some ways, didn't you?
That is a valid question, but we're also happy to explain. In a correctional facility, let's talk about Mangaung, we have 2,928 inmates there. And then when you get to report that inmate cell 35, you've got an inmate by this name, and there was fire, and the person was found, was located, beyond recognition on the floor. Why must you doubt that? Because it's a report that is coming from an authority of that particular facility to say, this is what has happened.
Well,
and then they're saying Correctional Services now start with their own processes now to say, it's an unnatural death. And we did that, what was expected of us. Little did we know that there were so many things which happened there, because it would have been an anomaly for us to keep quiet when we received such a report. We do receive many reports in correctional centers, whether inmates have assaulted each other, whether someone has died. But with this one, we needed to issue that alert. We don't do it with with all other inmates, but those who are classified to of high risk and whose cases may have attracted some attention. Hence, then we needed to issue that alert, because we knew immediately that there will be attention to say, who is this guy? How did he die? And hence we moved into that space quite quickly.
Sure. Well,
yes.
Can I also say that you say, why would you have done that? Well, the answer is because it wasn't true. It wasn't true, and
we now know.
Let me finish my question. Yeah. So it wasn't true, and my question, therefore, is, before making such a grand statement with so many implications, wasn't there a process of verification that could have happened both in the department but also in terms of communications, so that you didn't jump the gun?
The process went to as far as even a death certificate being issued.
So you are fooled, completely fooled.
So when now you even have a death certificate saying this person has died, there's a death certificate. So there was really nothing that we could say, okay, we still have to hold on to this, and because any minute counts there. It's like any other escape. Once someone has escaped, we're always under pressure to say, go out, because these people, of danger to society, they could even harm other people. So even with this particular one, no one knew that there could be something like this that was planned, and I'm sure over a period of time. It involved a number of people. I don't even think that the people who are before court is the end of it. We are likely to see even more, because a facility of that nature, with that type of technology, it's something that baffles all of us.
Okay, and when you say that, the question originally up front is, you're now saying more people may be brought to light.
Because of the investigation that we've conducted.
Hold on, yeah.
Yes.
My question is, why has no one from your department been held accountable? We have the inspecting judge saying there was collusion right to the top, and yet the people right at the top are sitting pretty still. Why has no one been held accountable yet?
And we're happy to respond to that. The triple Ps have a direct line of reporting to our Director for Contract Management. And when this whole thing happened, when we now were sitting with the final report and looking at everything, we had to place our Director of Contract Management on suspension to say there ought to have been more that should have been done
But
in
that's a small
this
fish,
matter.
Mr. Numalo, isn't it? The Director of Contract Management, if the collusion goes right
and that
to
is
the
a
top,
senior manager. That's a
not-
senior manager.
Well,
yes.
it's a senior manager, but we know there are ministers that are right at the top.
But it's how the whole
They-
thing is structured.
So
yes.
no one more senior than the contract manager yet has been held to account?
You ought to follow what the investigation is telling you and what your findings are saying. You then take action based on that. Hence, even the interventions that we've made at Mangaung, they are informed by that particular investigation. Otherwise, we'll then be acting beyond, any form of evidence. It would be difficult to then just say, Singabak, you need to take a fall here because you are more senior, and yeah.
Sure. Well,
yes.
Not you, but we've got a national commissioner. We've got the Deputy National Commissioner for Incarceration. We've got a regional commissioner. Let me say the regional commissioner, Ms. Moodley, I believe. So there are people who are responsible here. And so, yes, there's a contract division, but there are political office bearers here who stand at least accused of having this happen under their nose. So for me, the question is, what about those people? Can we expect that they will be at least made to account and possibly not just answer questions, but actually take serious responsibility for this breach?
The portfolios that you mentioned are not political. Those are within the administration of the department, and they are not linked to the line of reporting. It is very clear in terms of the Triple P contract that the director of prison there reports directly to the director of contract management at head office.
And who does the director of contract management report to?
Yeah. So when there are infringements or notices of disturbances, those will be reported in that particular office.
So who does the director of contract management report to then?
There will be different layers again at head office. Ultimately, you will then have the accounting officer in the form of the national commissioner. You will also then have the apex leadership politically, who now we are referring to the deputy minister and the minister. But with what we have currently, the outcome of the investigation, we said we could not overlook what ought to have been done by that particular official in that portfolio. Hence, we said, let us place you on suspension so that you can explain yourself why you should be held responsible for this.
So I find it firstly strange that someone who's responsible for incarceration for the whole department has nothing to do with this, how a regional commissioner has nothing to do with this. And then the other person I mentioned was the national commissioner, who you say does have something to do with this. So my question, I suppose, then would be, are any of these people, to your knowledge, considering their positions and doing what some might think is the honorable thing and resigning? Are you aware that anyone in these senior positions is thinking of falling on their sword?
Okay. I may not detail how the two triple Ps in terms of, I think I've explained the numbers there and where they are located. But their location doesn't necessarily mean that the regional commissioner then has to answer to that. As I've explained, the line is clear from that goes straight to head office. It's how the contract was designed. And that was done, before even year 2000. But the matter of Thabo Bester has not ended. There is still, there are many things happening there. So as we're seated right here, there are investigations going. What if we wake up tomorrow, there is another thing that has emerged? So it is not the end of it. Hence, we've been pleading. We understand the pressure with the public to say, allow us time so that we can get to the bottom of this. Because what if it's more than just the escape? There are other things happening there. For us, we are saying we understand people are impatient to say, but oh, hang on, this happened some time back. He said, yes, it could have been handled differently, but we're busy with it. Allow us space to work, complete this work, so that at least whatever that happened at that facility, you will never find it in any of the 243 correctional centers in South Africa.
Mr. Mamabolo, you've heard our exchange. You represent those who work within this system. So on the one hand, you're representing them, but on the other hand, some fingers have been pointed on these very people, warders who are working within the system. Firstly, how do you respond to the current state of accountability on this and some of the discussion that we've just had?
Thank you. Look, I think we firstly need to categorize between escapes from within correctional centers that are under the Department of Correctional Services and those that are within the hands of the private sector. Part of the PPPs that Numalo speaks about actually informed by what you call Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998, which stipulates as to how the relationship, the contractual relationship is to go about. And part of the obligations that the Department of Correctional Services has in that agreement, in that Correctional Services Act, is to ensure that they monitor the situation around the private prisons. And of course, for that, there are then controllers, what you call controllers. These are individuals who are on a daily basis monitoring the functioning and as to whether the company does comply with the prescripts of this act.
But even according to Section 112, I think, of that act, the department can step in the private prisons if there's a major question. So the accountability, sure, is with the private provider, but in extreme circumstances, there is an ability for the department to actually step in, which I believe is what's happened now.
That is where we think the department went wrong, because in line with that very same act, we feel that the department has not been doing its job, because, I mean, this is not the first time we hear of human rights abuses or any other challenges within the very same facility. Back in 2013, remember that government did take over the prison for a period of about 10 months, and then they reverted it back to them without necessarily holding them accountable. Now, this is the second time this is happening, and of course, there have been other atrocities reported and an escape after the Bester escape from the very same institution, which was not necessarily reported to the Department of Correctional Services. So it brings about the question as to whether the controllers are playing their roles or not. You know, that is the first thing on the part of the Department of Correctional Services. But secondly, as a union, we've always been against the privatization of prisons. We think that government should not outsource its security responsibilities to private prisons. I mean, G4S is not even a local company, it's a foreign-owned company. And of course, they are known for a lot of atrocities. You consider the fact that they are complicit in the situation that is happening between Israel and Palestine, and of course the infrastructure that continues to suppress Palestinians. They're coming from a history of such as ours. We would have obviously been better informed. But again, these companies their core mandate is not to rehabilitate, which is the mandate of the Department of Correctional Services since 1998.
And we are going to come to that, Mr. Mamabolo, and G4S is not here. Surprise, surprise. And they seem to be running from any possible interview. Anytime they get asked, they fall silent. So don't worry, we're going to go into the privatization of prisons, and I assure you, G4S is not going to leave today unscathed. But in terms of the department, do you think the department has done enough from where you sit at PopCrew to hold officials accountable for the Bester escape, but also just the crisis of escapes, an average of 60 a year for the last 3 years?
Look, with regards to the Bester matter, we think that investigations are still undergoing. The only place where we find them to have lacked accountability is with regards to the controllers who are supposed to actually be giving daily briefings around the happenings within that correctional facility. But again, with DCS-run prisons, I mean, there are a lot of underlying challenges that we can speak about, issues relating to overcrowding, understaffing. You would know that there's a population of around 138,000, whereas you've got a staff complement of around 34,000. About 12,000 of those 34,000 do perform administrative issues. Now, back in 2009, we signed an agreement, General Public Services Sector Bargaining Council Agreement 2 of 2009, wherein we had agreed, by then the staff complement was around 42,000, that we should increase the staff complement to actually ensure that within a space of 2 years it's at 60,000. Now, the staff complement has been declining and the present population grows on a regular basis. You've got challenges around the infrastructural integrity of our correctional centers across the country, 243 of them. And of course, perhaps part of the blame would not necessarily go to the department itself, but the fact that government had taken austerity measures to cut down on budgets within the entire criminal justice cluster. So that has been one of the major challenges. And of course, you remember that we just come from a time where we had this debacle around Bosasa. And I think moving from the Bosasa debacle, they have tried to ensure that they bring some form of self-sustainability, which I think even the current National Commissioner is actually encouraging, which is a good move in the long run. But as things stand currently, the situation is still quite bad. And of course, we think that there are areas for improvement.
Right. And I hear there the department, I hear austerity from the government. What about your members who work in this system? Some members, not just in the Bester escape, but in other escapes, must have been part of colluding with those who break out of prisons. To what extent are you holding your members who work within this system accountable for what Justice Cameron calls the collusion right through the system? Yeah,
look, we always encourage our members to avoid getting involved in any criminal activities. And of course, I think we should as well as appreciate the fact that they are overstretched as things stand. You know, there have been also numerous reports around the altercations that take place within correctional centers wherein our staff members get stabbed. Some of them have lost their lives. And of course, the core mandate, like I said, of rehabilitation cannot happen under such situations where one member has to look after probably around 30 inmates at a time, you know. So they are susceptible to attacks. And of course, that has got a negative impact around how we actually conduct the business of rehabilitation within our centers.
Right. No, absolutely. Thank you for a stimulating discussion. Are South Africa's correctional facilities in a security crisis? And is Thabo Bester just a symptom of a deeper security malaise in our criminal justice system? That's our conversation. Back after the break. Welcome back to Unfiltered. I'm Mpofu-Walsh, and we're discussing a potential crisis in South Africa's correctional services over a number of prison escapes, of course, the most high profile of which is the escape of Thabo Bester. But this is representative of a deeper malaise. Before we carry on with our conversation, let's just take a look at some of the numbers as concerns prison escapes. And you'll see that in 2019-2020 reporting cycle, we had 34. And then in 2020-2021, 117. Each of these is a Thabo Bester in a way. And 2021 to 2022, 22 escapes. So, I mean, clearly there's a huge year in 2020, but even 22, 34, Thabo Bester is by no means the only person who has escaped from South Africa's prisons. Yes, it's high profile. Yes, it's maximum security. But these numbers show that there's a wider problem of prison escape. We could also ask, because these come from the department, exactly how accurate the figures are, because we are also never sure whether, these escapes have actually been appropriately reported or not. So it seems like there is a wider problem of prison escapes, Mr. Nxumalo, and that the Bester escape is just one that we got caught and caught the limelight, but 60 a year on average.
It's important that I think we give some context and where the department comes from. Around 2010, we had over 160, yeah, I think 107 escapes. And the numbers have been decreasing over the years because of measures that the department has been putting in place. There are even strategies to say, how do we fight gangsterism, and also making a point that our officials, go back to the basics when you look at standard operating procedures. But the huge jump that you see, I think about 117, that was one incident in one of our facilities in the Western Cape, where remand detainees managed to grab an official, disarmed him in a manner of taking the keys, opened, and they ran wide. All of them were caught, rearrested. But the measure is that there shouldn't be an inmate escaping. Whether you've rearrested them, that it will count as someone who has escaped. Hence, we'll have that huge jump. But still, the 22 after that is a big number. It does concern us because no one should find it easy to escape. But for every escape, you find that it has to be assisted either from inside or from outside. And we've been looking at how inmates have been, exploring various ways, to escape, even the type of material that they will use. Like, and they will cut those window bars at times. You even ask yourself, how can someone cut such a strong bar with mesh inside? But it does happen. But then we've also looked in terms of the operating procedures, because it does explain that our officials must almost daily basis test the strength of the facility, even have a special hammer to check if those grills are still intact. So these are some of the things, and when there is a gap, we do take action. But once there's an escape, it does pain us, because we even have to look at the performance of the department. 2020 and 21 financial year, unqualified audit opinion, and the following year after that. But the moment we've got an escape, it says, is Correctional Services able to respond to its mandate? Well, you therefore need to draw that line.
The question is, what kind of action has been taken, let's say over these last 3 years, in terms of accountability for the number of escapes?
For the number of escapes.
Because you say action has been taken. What action has been taken?
Mr. Mabudu will tell you a number of officials, will take us on appeal, because we do not just dismiss them from service. We even open criminal cases where we find that, in actual fact, they played an active role towards aiding an escape.
And how many would you say?
I will not have those figures right now, but these are measures that we monitor over time to say, not just with escapes, even with contrabands, those that we find that they take either a mobile phone or even drugs at times, which is something that is very concerning. To say, but we need to look at even how we manage access to our facilities. Some of them will have body scanners, but not all of them. It's an expensive equipment. I don't see us having those scanners in all 243 centers, but even I spoke about back to basics and the role of supervisors in making a point that we avoid such things from happening. And when officials deviate from the core mandate, we do act against them.
Are there any kind of key performance? Do you have any goals, for example, for the number of escapes that you want to bring it down towards? Do we know when we're going to get to 10, 5, 0? Do we have those goals in place? Because it's one thing to hold people accountable retrospectively, but is there something in place which says by next year?
Yes, in our performance information is there, because although as the department was saying we will want 0, but if, for instance, the previous year we had 22, we will then say the following financial year we will want those numbers go down even to below 15, and we measure ourselves against that. But we know that we are fighting for a 0 escape.
So the goal is 15 for next year?
I'll need to check for the next financial year, because I think it was finalized not so long ago. But as a department, we wouldn't even want one escape taking place. But you have a system that in year 2000 only had 242 life-eyes, 242. As I'm sitting here, we have 18,917. You can do the math there to say what's the percentage of increase. It talks about how the inmate population has increased over time in this country. We're now standing, as my colleague mentioned the figure, but the actual figure is 157,000.
But
inmates.
this is a deeper problem of the security cluster.
It's beyond just Correctional Services.
Yes, but let me finish the question. Yes, but that's a deeper malaise of the security cluster and the security and the criminal justice system of which you form part, because we're not resolving the crime problem. They're now ballooning numbers of prisoners. So you're replacing one problem with a problem that maybe might not be exactly your problem, but it's still a problem of the state's wider making.
We've been increasing the bed space by renovating, extending, even building new facilities. But we've been saying this is not ideal for a developing country like South Africa. Why are people committing crime in the scale that they are doing? It pained me so much last year when I was just checking what's happening within the system. I picked up we have more than 42,000 inmates who are below the age of 35. And these people are not doing short sentences, they're doing long term. It means they will mature in our system. By the time they get released, they will be well above 50s. That is concerning for a country like South Africa, which then says, I think, yes, look at correctional services, but I think broader society, we need to start asking ourselves questions to say, are we playing a role that we ought to play? Yes, we'll continue to build these facilities. There's one that we're busy with in Paris, but is it the ultimate solution? And I will say, we've even increasing the number of staff members. COVID did hit everyone hard, but correctional services has been finding creative ways to employ people. And we are going to come to that.
We're going to come to that because we do need to have a deeper discussion about the correctional services system itself and whether it's the appropriate one. And towards the end of our conversation, we will. But I'm still on the accountability right now.
Yeah.
And Mr. Mamabolo, how do you respond in terms of the escapes, the scale of the escapes, and is enough being done from your perspective to stem this tide of escapes?
Yeah, look, I agree on the fact that, there are other broader socio-economic challenges that lead to the number of increases of inmates within our correctional centers. And of course, it's something that needs to be addressed. But for us, really, we find it unfortunate that in terms of these escapes that we speak about, in most cases, it's only junior officials who are charged. And the department has never taken time to really consider the conditions under which they work. And we spoke about issues around understaffing. You've got, at any given time, you've got a limited number of officials having to look after a large population of inmates. And of course, that then puts their lives at risk. So they cannot be everywhere at the same time. It's not easy to detect.
What are you calling for in terms of, have you called for more senior people to resign? What pressure have you put on the department to be more accountable?
Look, we think that they need to ensure that the infrastructural integrity, the basics are actually addressed in terms of ensuring that the infrastructural integrity is addressed, increase the staff complement, because, we might complain about the escapes, but as long as you've got limited staff capacity to actually monitor and ensure that we perform the core mandate of the department, it's going to be a future exercise because you'll still have these escapes. You still have 85% reoffending rate, which is currently what we have, meaning that 85% of those released from our correctional centers tend to reoffend because they do not get the necessary skills to ensure that they become self-sustainable beyond incarceration. So those are some of the things that we think that should definitely be addressed. In addressing those, of course, some of them might be long-term, but they will then result in bringing about stability within our correctional centers. And of course, hopefully, we're ensuring that we prevent some of these escapes that have been happening at large scale.
Are there any specific people that you have called to be held accountable over this escape question?
Look, which escape really?
The numbers of escapes we've just seen, 60 a year in various places. Hold on, these are your members are in these facilities, sometimes not necessarily through your own bidding, but could be complicit in some of these escapes. So my question is, are you as the union doing enough to say to correctional services, these people need to be held accountable? Or are you part of the problem to the extent that you're actually not holding people accountable enough?
Look, we always encourage our members, of course, not to get involved in such acts. But I think in this regard, we have been engaging with the Department of Correctional Services to say that, they need to look at the conditions within which our members work under. And for that, we can only blame the management of the department as and when these escapes do happen, because it's dependent on the conditions, really. It's one thing to say that junior members are found guilty, which is unfortunate, which is actually happening, whereas you place them under conditions wherein they themselves are put at risk.
Is there a form of accountability for your members working in the system? We hear stories of warders, living above their means, being complicit with these escapes, being complicit with violence within prisons. Are there lifestyle audits happening on your members? Are you checking your members to make sure that they are not being part of the problem? What systems are you putting in place to make this a safer and a better system?
Look, we do not necessarily conduct lifestyle audits. I think the department is the one which would normally do that. But what we do is to facilitate engagements around how we could best ensure that our members perform to the best of their ability, in ensuring that we also ensure that our facilities remain a safe place. But again, like I'm emphasizing, the challenge really here has been the fact that either management or government has not necessarily been channeling the necessary resources to ensure that conditions are stable for members to work in.
Mr. Nxumalo,
Yes.
apparently you're not providing the resources necessary for people to be able to do their jobs within the system. How do you respond?
There's a lot of work that Correctional Services is doing, but we cannot avoid the fact that a number of our facilities are old. They were created many years ago, specifically to warehouse people. And we needed to reform the system into a rehabilitation one. And to say now, how do we modify that space where people can say, with the time that I have to spend here, let me do something positive, let me acquire a skill so that post-incarceration, I can do something positive. What we then find, where then inmates have managed to pick up that perhaps there's a defect somewhere, don't want to manipulate that. Hence, we always call upon our officials to be vigilant at all times. And when we pick up something, to act. Hence, we even take them, for even training or advanced training, so that we even equip them with other modest or new tactics that inmates, will deploy. An inmate that is admitted today is not the same as the one that was admitted 20 years ago. The type of crime or patterns of crime have changed. So from time to time, it's important then also to take our officials to that level. And what we've seen, especially with inmates from other countries, the manner in which they will, work towards breaking out of our system, it's something that is not common. And these are things that we follow so that we're a step ahead. But when an escape happens, it's something, with the Bester one, it's something we've never seen before.
Sure.
Yes.
But look, by all accounts, this is a terrible system in which to work. Sometimes you
it's a thankless one.
and we thank you for fielding the tough questions for that system. But people working within the system fear for their lives. They can be stabbed at any moment. I mean, by any account, that's one of the hardest jobs in South Africa. Are we paying people in the system enough, given the risks that they have to undergo when they do their jobs right?
I think the issue of pay can always be debated, but we do believe that as Correctional Services, what we pay is even above compared to other institutions that will pay their officials at that particular level, even the type of privileges that we offer. But the organized level will always be against that, because they will always want something, of which we're saying, wherever you can get more, do give it, to people. Hence, we've said the numbers that we have are not sufficient, and we've been pleading, with the state to say, you are increasing the number of officials on the police side. They are doing phenomenal work in terms of bringing people who are breaking the law. Yet from our side, somehow the numbers are not moving so much. When I joined the department, we had about 34,000 officials. At least now we're at 38,000. But still, with the increasing inmate population, it therefore says we need to get more officials on the ground.
Right.
Hence, we're always looking to say, perhaps we need to move officials from head office to our centers. And you just have to find innovative ways to say where to find a balancing act, because it's not an easy task.
Mr. Mamabulo, the department's doing everything it can, and there's no more extra money to go around. Is that a fair summation of the constraints of the department? Well,
it can never be fair, really. I think under the conditions which our members work under, they continue to survive the brunt of such conditions. And of course, I think with regards to worker issues now, there are many agreements that have been signed in the past which have not been implemented by the department through bargaining councils, of course. I mean, issues around the shift pattern, we still don't have a shift pattern within the Department of Correctional Services. That is one of the problems which leads to, well, these altercations and, of course, challenges around short staffing as well.
What exactly is that shift pattern?
Well, there are supposed to be, categorization of shifts. We had, in fact, back in 2009, when we were signing this agreement that I spoke about, we're supposed to have a 7-day establishment, meaning that determining how long the people work and for what long hours and how much they're then compensated. Those are some of the proposals that have been put on the table, have been agreed on, and yet the implementation part on the part of the department has not been forthcoming. So those are some of the challenges that we do have.
Absolutely. We're discussing whether we have a crisis of security in our correctional system. Is Thabo Bester just one high-profile example of a deeper security malaise? We'll continue our conversation on the privatization of prisons and G4S after this. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're discussing the security crisis in South Africa's correctional services sector. I want to take you through some further numbers, and this is about injuries that are sustained within the correctional services facilities. And you can see in 2020, we have 5,699 reported. In 2021-22, we have 3,738. We have an unprecedented crisis of injuries, of violence, of instability within these correctional centers. So on the one hand, we have a problem of escapes and people leaving the punishment aspect of the correctional system. But on the other hand, when people are within the system, their own rights get violated, not only as inmates, but also warders and people who are responsible for administering the system. So we have a double crisis, Mr. Nxumalo, don't we? On the one hand, there are lots of escapes, but once people are in, it's also violent inside.
The escapes have been decreasing.
22, 60.
Yeah, I think we need to agree to say the numbers have been
one.
coming down. It therefore says the strategy is working.
Well, we had 100
Yeah, but it was one incident where all those people were rearrested.
I mean, we can't just ignore.
Yeah, we cannot ignore, but it's important to provide context. On the issue of injuries or assaults, it's a pity that your graph doesn't then differentiate between inmate on inmate and inmate on official. South Africa is facing a serious issue of gangsterism out there in the communities, and it finds its way into our facilities. You'll find our officials being attacked, assaulted for no reason. And when we then need to act against those inmates, it is not so easy because in most cases, Mr. Mabul will tell you, our officials do feel that the law favors inmates because whenever action is taken against now our officials who are trying to put a stop to that fracas, you find that law would be very hard on them. But always say, do what we've trained you to do in case you find yourself in such a situation. It's important that there is respect in correctional centers because those are closed spaces. The moment there's chaos, it becomes something else. It's important that inmates respect one another and that also respect officials, as we expect officials to also treat inmates with respect. So you then find these disturbing trends where you then find assault cases. They are not nice. It is very painful when an official now has to be booked in because he has suffered an injury, or when an inmate is injured. It's something that we continue to check. Hence, even our gang combating strategy is looking into it. But we've said as Correctional Services, we need to go out. We do not just preach the gospel inside, even to communities out there through our county corrections, to say, let us engage with communities because we are able to see where do these things happen and the line that will then connect with correctional centers so that at least we can find a way where we can say our facilities are safe and secure because any form of chaos in a closed environment can be catastrophic.
Mr. Mamabulo, the instability, the uncertainty of working in the sector, and then also we have a view that there aren't enough legal protections to protect the good people in the system who are trying to keep it functioning from actually doing their jobs under such threats of violence.
Yeah, on our part, we've considered the fact that inmates are remaining idle as things stand, and of course that then breeds levels of gangsterism specifically. And for that, we have since engaged with the department to look into having programs that would ensure that correctional centers become self-sustainable in terms of producing their own food, clothing, and furniture, of course, and many other things, agricultural products. And for that, I think there has been some form of cooperation because the program has started. We're looking into the long run of it. We think that due to the fact that we currently have 85% reoffending rate, we would like to reduce that number. And for that to happen, you need to then have programs which are concurrent and, of course, consistent within these centers, which will ensure that they skill all these inmates so that when they conclude their incarceration, they can then provide skills actually and perhaps create jobs. So that's one thing that we're doing. And, of course, the department is working with, it's actually having programs. But as well, we also have got community outreach programs where we're working with a foundation like Safer South Africa Foundation, which mainly focuses on educating young people, learners across different high schools within the country about the doings, the entire doings of the criminal justice system in its entirety, what the courts are about. Sometimes they are even taken to prisons to actually observe what goes on in there, to courts, of course, and they work with police stations. So we think that is part of our social responsibility. And of course, I think some of these events would actually result in preventing young people from getting into these institutions.
And you speak about social responsibility, and that brings us on to another question, which you alluded to earlier, which is that this is a profoundly public act of punishing those who commit crimes against society and, of course, victims. Do you think that any form of correctional facility should be privatized in South Africa?
No, not at all. We've moved from a punitive department to a corrective department. The aim was to rehabilitate. Now, you cannot have a foreign company rehabilitating your people there. That is the mandate of government, and that is the core mandate of the Department of Correctional Services. Private companies are focused on profit maximization, and of course, G4S is a classic example because of all the atrocities that they've not only committed in South Africa alone, but you go to Israel, you go to the manner in which they have actually assisted the Israel state to oppress Palestinians as well is one such good example. But as well as the fact that since they have been here, there have been previously reports about human rights abuses. And of course, with this current Thabo Bester matter, we're learning more of their arrogance. They have been very arrogant. Just a week or two ago, they were still saying that Thabo Bester had died in the fire, while Numalo here was saying something different. Yeah. And of course, that then shows that they even undermine the very same department which had contracted them to actually carry out the running of that facility.
And they must have known that was false. Well, we now know it was false, but they were persisting in that falsehood.
They indeed have persisted. They continue to persist. They have not come out with something different. That is why we think they have been arrogant. And that is why we're also saying that the department should partly take the blame for that, because they had allowed for such a condition to be created where they can be undermined by a foreign private company. So it's something that needs to be taken up with. And I think on a daily basis, there are new developments with regards to this current matter. And hopefully, we think that it should obviously be dealt with at a different level. Remember that, by the way, G4 has had conducted its own investigations last year, May, after the so-called fire happened. And they had charged all those people for negligence, not any form of escape. And so when you consider some of these things, that's where the department should have definitely been involved. So they definitely need to cut ties with the G4S.
Absolutely, and we're going to get to that. There's been some activity on social media, so I just want to come to some tweets about our conversation, and then I'm going to continue with this question of G4S. We have one tweet which says, "The issue of South African prisons and those escapes are an embarrassment to our department and government. Coalition of officials and politicians is a serious matter. Sizwe, senior officials need to take responsibility. The corrupt correctional officers and managers are the people who cause the security crisis in South African prisons. Unfortunately, the junior staff are the people who are being punished, and that's Muzuvukile. So those are some of our thoughts. Mr. Nxumalo, just in 1 minute on G4S, yes. Could you just tell us whether this contract is going to be terminated? We heard from the minister last night, I think, that you're still thinking about it. Have you thought about it yet?
We've referred the contract to our legal services to give us an opinion, so that we will see how we take it forward.
Any idea when that opinion will be?
Because the danger is that you can't just act without being informed by anything. Because
any idea on the timeline?
They will give us that opinion. Why am I saying this? If you decide now that kick them out, you are left with about two and some months. You will have to pay them 2.5 billion rands should they win that case in court. So it's something that will be sensitive. But I think that I need to address. Inmates are not idling.
30 seconds.
Yes, we are no longer procuring eggs, pork, and a number of our facilities are no longer even procuring vegetables because of the work that we're doing in terms of making our facilities self-sustainable. So there's good progress in that front. Rehabilitation does work.
Mr. Nxumalo, Mr. Mamabulo, thank you so much for your time and sharing insights on this question. Thank you very much for joining us. Are South Africa's prisons in a security crisis? That's the question we've covered this evening, and we look forward to covering more hard-hitting conversations right here on Unfiltered. Join us on the next episode. Have a good evening.